Dawn in a medieval monastery. You walk barefoot across cold stone, the scent of herbs and bread guiding you toward the brewery. The sacred brew kettle. The monks stir a bubbling vat, not for luxury, but for survival, devotion, and the occasional holy hangover. Water wasn't safe to drink. Remember that? Well, neither was medieval beer, but at least it came with blessings. Monastic brewing laws, rulebooks written in Latin, tell us how many pints each monk should drink. Spoiler, it's a lot. The tools of the trade, wooden casks, iron ladles, and wicker baskets. No alarm clocks, just the rhythm of prayer and fermentation. Herbs before hops. The monks brewed with coriander, yarrow, and St. John's wort, before hops became the golden standard. Brewing as worship. Every step of the process was a prayer, from mashing to bottling. Yes, even the stirring had spiritual meaning. Beer for everyone, from abbots to orphans, everyone got their daily ration. Even children sipped on small beer. A brewery in every abbey. Stone walls echo with the clink of wooden mugs and the low murmur of grateful monks. The science of fermentation. Long before Pasteur, they knew something magical happened when yeast met grain. Monks versus secular brewers. Not all brewers were holy, but only monks could make beer and confession part of the process. Beer as medicine. Sip by sip, it cured fevers, eased childbirth, and replaced water in times of plague. The beer that built Europe. Monasteries brewed empires, funded bridges, and fed the poor, one barrel at a time. The decline of holy hops. As power shifted, so did brewing rights. But the legacy stuck around. From cloisters to craft, tonight's journey ends where history began, with a quiet toast to monks who made beer divine. Welcome, seekers of ancient truth. Step into the shadows of history, where real stories unfold, raw, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Let's uncover the past together. You're walking barefoot across cold stone floors, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, fresh bread, and something else. Something earthy, yeasty, and just a little intoxicating. You blink against the early morning haze filtering through stained glass windows. Outside, roosters crow, bells toll, and somewhere nearby, water sloshes from a wooden bucket into a waiting barrel. This is life in a medieval monastery, where every day begins before sunrise, and ends long after the last prayer has been whispered. And tonight, we're not here for sermons or saints. We're here for beer. Because yes, monks brewed beer. Not just for themselves, but for pilgrims, paupers, and the occasional noble who needed a good hangover cure. And no, this isn't some quirky footnote buried in dusty manuscripts. It's a fact. Monks were some of the best brewers in Europe. They didn't just drink beer. They perfected it. But let's take a moment to appreciate how absurd this all sounds. We're talking about men in robes, kneeling in prayer 1 minute and stirring giant vats of fermenting grain the next. No alarm clocks. No modern brewing equipment. Just intuition, tradition, and a whole lot of faith that the yeast wouldn't kill them. Historians still argue whether monastic beer was medicine, sacrament, or just a really good excuse to get through another day of fasting. But you're about to find out firsthand. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling especially sleepy, leave a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's oddly soothing knowing people all over the world are drifting off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The monastery stirs to life around you. Hooded figures move silently through candlelit corridors, their footsteps muffled by centuries-old rugs. The chapel echoes with low chants, but your path leads elsewhere, to the heart of the abbey, where the real magic happens, the brewery. Here, in the depths of the cloister, the heat of the fire warms your skin as massive copper kettles bubble and steam. Wooden beams overhead sag under the weight of years, and the scent of malted barley clings to the air like incense. A monk lifts the lid of a steaming vat, releasing a cloud of fragrant vapor that smells like warmth, comfort, and just a hint of divine indulgence. This is where it all began. You step closer, drawn in by the warmth of the fire and the rhythmic clinking of wooden ladles against iron cauldrons. The monks work in near silence, their hands moving with the quiet precision of those who've done this 1,000 times before. No rush. No noise. Just the steady hum of brewing, of stirring, measuring, tasting, and waiting. Because beer wasn't just a drink to them. It was sustenance. A daily ration for body and soul. And if you were lucky enough to live behind these stone walls, you got your share. Whether you were a hardened abbot or a wide-eyed novice still learning how to fold your robe properly. Tonight, you're standing among them. Watching as they scoop handfuls of crushed malted barley into bubbling water, the grains releasing their sweet, starchy perfume into the air. You can almost taste it, the thick, slightly yeasty sweetness that clings to the tongue like honey on a cold morning. The process is simple, yet sacred. Water, grain, herbs, and time. That's all they had. No refrigeration. No pasteurization. Just patience, tradition, and a little divine guidance. Because let's be honest, if anyone could turn fermented grain into something holy, it was medieval monks. Now, picture this, you're not just an observer anymore. You're in the story. Your sleeves are rolled up, your fingers stained with damp flour from helping knead bread earlier. Someone presses a wooden ladle into your hand and gestures toward the vat. Stir, they say. And don't stop until the blessing is done. So you do. Slowly, methodically, just like they taught you. The mixture bubbles beneath your touch, thick and golden, smelling like fresh bread and something older, something ancient. Historians still argue whether monastic beer was meant to nourish, medicate, or simply keep monks from going mad during long days of fasting. But one thing's certain, if you lived in a medieval monastery, beer was part of your life. Not just at meals, but at breakfast, at bedtime, and sometimes even mid-prayer if someone got creative with the rules. A bell rings softly in the distance, signaling the next round of prayers, or maybe just another batch of beer reaching its peak. Either way, you keep stirring, but your thoughts drift to something the monks mentioned earlier: water wasn't safe. Not here, not anywhere in medieval Europe. The rivers were full of runoff from tanneries, animal waste, and who knows what else. Wells could be contaminated with bacteria or worse, like lead from old Roman pipes or even bits of rotting organic matter that somehow made its way into the drinking supply. So what did people drink instead? Beer. That's right. Everyone drank beer. Nobles. Farmers. Children. Even babies got a diluted version called small beer, which was low in alcohol but high in calories and flavor. It was basically medieval Gatorade, if Gatorade tasted like bread soaked in water and left to ferment for a few days. And let's be honest, it probably didn't taste amazing. But it was better than dying of dysentery after sipping from the wrong well. Historians still argue whether medieval beer was truly safer than water or if it just numbed the senses enough that you stopped caring. Either way, it was everywhere. In monasteries, in taverns, in peasant huts, and on the lips of every man, woman, and child who wanted to make it through the day without an intestinal rebellion. You glance around the brewery as another monk lifts a ladleful of the golden brown liquid and takes a careful sip. He nods approvingly before passing it to a younger brother, who drinks deeply like it's some kind of sacred ritual. Which, honestly, it kind of was. Because this wasn't just about survival. It was about faith, tradition, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of joy. The thought makes you smile as you continue stirring, wondering how many modern-day hangovers can be traced back to medieval brewing habits. Probably a lot. You're still stirring, still listening, still trying not to spill the bubbling mixture onto your robes, which, judging by the dark stains already clinging to the fabric, are in desperate need of a wash. But no one seems to mind. The monks work with quiet reverence, their daily routines guided not just by faith, but by rules. Not the kind that tell you what to wear or how to fold your socks, but actual written guidelines on brewing beer, penned centuries ago and passed down through generations like sacred scrolls of fermentation. Because yes, monastic life wasn't just about prayer and penance. It was also about structure. And when it came to beer, they were surprisingly specific. Some monasteries followed the rule of Saint Benedict, which laid out clear expectations for daily life, including meal times, work hours, and even beer rations. That's right. Medieval monks had official beer allowances. Depending on rank, age, and general thirst level, some monks got as much as 5 pints a day. Yes, 5. Not watered-down sips either, real, honest-to-goodness beer, brewed fresh and handed out like communion wine at Sunday Mass. Now, before you start drafting a letter to your local priest demanding similar treatment, remember, this was a different time. Beer wasn't a vice, it was nutrition. A thick, filling beverage packed with calories, protein, and just enough alcohol to take the edge off another long day of kneeling, chanting, and sweeping stone floors with twigs tied to sticks. And if someone broke the rules? Well, sometimes beer was used as punishment, too. If a monk misbehaved, say, he skipped prayers to nap behind the brewery, he might get his ration reduced. Imagine that. Being sentenced to sobriety in a world where beer was basically breakfast. Historians still argue whether these rules were meant to encourage discipline, or just keep everyone from getting completely hammered during Vespers. Either way, it worked. Monks stayed fed, hydrated, and, somehow, not entirely drunk. At least, not until Saturday. You finally set the ladle down, your arms aching from all that stirring, though you suspect it's more about technique than strength. The monks make it look effortless, their movements smooth and practiced, like they've been brewing beer since before time had names. Now, it's time for the real work to begin. Around you, the brewery hums with quiet activity. Wooden casks line the stone walls, stacked neatly like sleeping giants waiting to be filled. Iron ladles clink against copper kettles. Wicker baskets overflow with bundles of dried herbs, their earthy scent mingling with the warmth of fresh brewed wort. This is the heart of monastic brewing, the tools, the rhythm, the craft. And yes, this was a craft. Long before modern breweries perfected temperature control and yeast strains, these monks relied on instinct, tradition, and the occasional divine inspiration to get it right. Let's take a closer look at what they actually used. First, the wooden casks, hand-carved, sealed with beeswax or resin, and carefully maintained because replacements weren't exactly available at the local medieval hardware shop. These casks stored everything: water, grain, and eventually beer. Some were even passed down through generations, each one carrying the accumulated wisdom, and possibly lingering bacteria, of centuries past. Then there were the iron ladles, sturdy and heavy, designed to withstand years of use. No plastic handles here, just solid metal, perfect for bruising your knuckles if you weren't paying attention. You remember one monk warning you earlier, don't let the ladle touch the floor. It absorbs sin. Or was that just superstition? Either way, you're not taking chances. The wicker baskets are next, light, flexible, and woven by hand, probably by someone who also made fish traps and storage containers for root vegetables. They held barley, hops, and whatever herbal ingredients the monastery preferred. And speaking of ingredients, historians still argue whether monastic brewers knew exactly what they were doing when it came to fermentation. Did they understand yeast? Probably not in the scientific sense. But they knew something happened when grain met water and heat, and that the result could either nourish or knock you flat, depending on how long it sat. So as you pick up another basket, it's weave rough beneath your fingers, you realize this isn't just brewing. It's alchemy. You reach for a bundle of dried herbs resting on a wooden shelf, fingers brushing over the brittle leaves and stems. The scent is sharp, earthy, slightly bitter, and not at all what you'd expect in something meant to flavor beer. But this isn't modern beer. This is medieval monastic brew, and back then, hops weren't exactly standard issue. Nope. Before that green, cone-shaped flower became the darling of every modern craft brewery, monks were throwing all sorts of weird and wonderful things into their vats. Think coriander, yarrow, St. John's wort, wormwood, juniper berries, even mugwort. Basically the medieval equivalent of dumping your spice rack into a kettle and hoping for the best. They called it Brewed, a secret blend of herbs used to flavor and preserve their beer before hops came along and ruined all the fun. Some recipes even included hallucinogenic plants, which might explain why certain monks kept having visions during midnight prayers. Now, don't get me wrong, there was a method to the madness. These herbs weren't just random additions plucked from the garden because someone got bored. Many of them had medicinal properties. Yarrow stopped bleeding. Coriander eased digestion. Mugwort? Well, that one might have been about improving dreams, or inducing them. Historians still argue whether these ingredients were chosen purely for their effects or if they were inherited from older pagan traditions, passed down through whispered secrets and half-remembered folk remedies. Either way, they worked, at least well enough to keep people drinking without dropping dead mid-prayer. You watch as a monk crushes a handful of coriander seeds between his fingers, releasing a citrusy aroma that cuts through the heavier notes of malt and boiled grain. He tosses them into the vat with a practiced flick of the wrist, muttering something under his breath. A blessing? A recipe note? Who knows? Either way, it smells better now. And considering you've already tasted some of this stuff, by accident, when you leaned in too close, you're grateful for the improvement. Because let's be honest, early medieval beer wasn't exactly known for its gourmet flavor profile. Without hops, it lacked that crisp bitterness we associate with modern brews. Instead, it was sweet, thick, almost porridge-like. Some versions were even served warm, straight from the barrel. Not quite IPA material. More like liquid bread with a hint of herbal funk. But hey, it kept people alive. And sometimes, that's the best compliment you can give a beer. The vat bubbles gently, its golden brown surface shimmering in the firelight. You lean closer, watching as a monk stirs the mixture with slow, deliberate movements, like he's not just brewing beer but casting a spell. And maybe he is. Because to these monks, everything is a prayer. Every task, every motion, every whispered word over bubbling wort, it all counts. Brewing isn't just about filling barrels and feeding bellies. It's an act of devotion, a sacrament, a way to honor God through labor, patience, and the occasional divine hangover. You can feel it in the air, the reverence, the rhythm, the quiet certainty that what they're doing matters. This isn't just beer. It's sustenance. A gift from grain, water, and time, blessed by hands that have spent years mastering the craft. And yes, they really did treat it like worship. Some monasteries had specific prayers for each step of the process, one for soaking the grain, another for stirring the mash, and at least 3 different blessings for fermentation, because apparently, you couldn't be too careful when trusting your survival to yeast. You imagine one of them kneeling beside the vat, eyes closed, lips moving silently before dipping his ladle into the brew. Maybe he's asking for protection against spoilage. Or maybe he's just hoping this batch doesn't taste like boiled socks again. Either way, you get the feeling faith plays a bigger role in brewing than modern science would like to admit. Historians still argue whether monastic brewers saw their work as holy duty or just a necessary part of daily life. But honestly, it was probably both. Because when you live behind stone walls, surviving on bread, prayer, and whatever beer you can squeeze out of last season's barley harvest, you learn to make the most of every moment. So you join in. Not with words, not yet, but with action. You reach for the ladle, dip it into the thickening liquid, and stir. Slowly, carefully. Like you're not just mixing ingredients, but blending history, tradition, and something older than time itself. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the monastery, a bell rings softly. Time for prayer. Or maybe just another shift at the brewery. Either way, you keep stirring. Because tonight, you're not just learning how monks brewed beer. You're becoming part of the ritual. The brewery hums with quiet life, a steady rhythm of ladles stirring and vats bubbling. And now comes the moment you've been waiting for, distribution time. You watch as barrels are filled, wooden mugs are passed around, and every monk gets their share. Some drink slowly, savoring the warmth as it slides down their throats. Others take deep gulps like they've been fasting for days and just remembered what flavor is. And yes, everyone gets a portion. Not just the abbots and senior monks who probably earned their beer through years of wisdom and suffering through long sermons. No, even the youngest novices, still learning how to tie their robes properly, receive their daily ration. Even the sick get a special brew made with extra herbs and less alcohol. Because if you were bedridden in a cold stone room with nothing but candlelight and Latin prayers to keep you company, you'd want something warm and filling too. Children? Oh, they weren't left out either. Remember that small beer we mentioned earlier? That was real. It had minimal alcohol, just enough to make it safe to drink, but not enough to knock anyone off their feet. It was thick, slightly sweet, and probably tasted like bread soaked in water and left to sit overnight. But hey, it kept kids from getting dysentery, so points for effort. Even orphans living under the monastery's protection got their share. Because when your options are beer or questionable well water, you don't turn down a warm mug just because it smells vaguely like old socks. Historians still argue whether medieval children actually liked small beer or just drank it out of necessity. Either way, it was part of daily life, and for many, it was the only source of nutrition beyond whatever scraps the kitchen could spare. You accept your own cup, feeling the weight of it in your hands. The liquid inside is darker than modern beer, almost amber-colored, with a slight haze that suggests this isn't exactly filtered to perfection. Still, the scent is inviting, earthy, slightly sweet, with hints of coriander and something else you can't quite place. You take a careful sip. It's strong. Not in the way of modern IPAs that punch you in the face with hop bitterness, but in the way of something that feels like it could fill you up. Like drinking a meal instead of just washing one down. Around you, the monks nod approvingly. One claps you on the shoulder, either in approval or because he's already halfway to drunk. Either way, you raise your cup in return and take another slow sip. Because tonight, you're not just tasting history. You're living it. The brewery never truly sleeps. Even now, as night settles over the monastery and most of the brothers retreat to their cells for prayer or rest, the brewing hall remains alive with quiet purpose. You can hear it in the soft creak of wooden beams settling, in the occasional hiss of steam escaping a half-covered vat, in the rhythmic tapping of a monk checking the seal on a newly filled barrel. Every abbey had one, sometimes more than one. These breweries weren't just side projects or hobbies for idle hands. They were essential. Just like the chapel, the scriptorium, and the infirmary, the brewery was woven into the very fabric of monastic life. Some monasteries even built entire wings dedicated to brewing, complete with storage rooms, fermentation chambers, and specialized tools for mashing, boiling, and bottling. You walk past rows of stacked casks, each one labeled carefully with symbols or short Latin inscriptions. For pilgrims, for winter, for the abbot's feast. Some are sealed tight, waiting for the slow magic of fermentation to do its work. Others are open, releasing faint wisps of yeasty air that curl around your nose like an old friend. And everywhere you look, there's beer. Not just for monks, either. Pilgrims who arrived at the monastery gates after long days of travel were welcomed with warm meals. And yes, a generous mug of beer to steady them after their journey. The sick received medicinal brews, spiced with herbs meant to soothe fevers and ease stomach ailments. Even the poor, who lived on the outskirts of the monastery walls, benefited from this liquid generosity. Some abbeys operated communal breweries, allowing local villagers to bring their own grain in exchange for a share of the final product. It wasn't just about charity. It was about community. Monks didn't brew in isolation, they brewed for everyone. Beer was currency, sustenance, medicine, and celebration all wrapped into one. And in a world where clean water was rare and food supplies were unpredictable, having a steady stream of nourishing, mildly alcoholic beverage on hand made all the difference. Historians still argue whether monastic brewers saw themselves as caretakers, healers, or simply craftsmen doing their part for the greater good. But one thing is clear: wherever there was a monastery, there was always beer. And tonight, you're standing right in the heart of it. The fire still glows, casting long shadows across the stone walls of the brewery. You lean against a wooden barrel, feeling the warmth seep into your bones as you sip slowly from your mug. The beer is rich, slightly sweet, and thick enough that it feels like it could stick to your ribs. Exactly what monks needed after a day of fasting, prayer, and hauling buckets of water from the well. But here's the thing about medieval brewing: they didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have pasteurization. And they certainly didn't have yeast in neat little packets labeled ale or lager. So how did they manage to brew consistently without turning every batch into something that could double as floor polish? They watched. They waited. And most importantly, they listened. Because fermentation wasn't just a process. It was a mystery. A slow, bubbling transformation that turned simple grains into nourishment, warmth, and occasionally, mild intoxication. And while they didn't know the science behind yeast the way we do now, no microscopes, no lab coats, no fermentation temperature charts, they knew something was happening when the mixture began to bubble and foam. Some monks called it a gift from God. Others probably just hoped it wouldn't make them sick again. Either way, they learned to work with it. You watch as one of the brewers dips his ladle into a vat, lifting it high so the liquid streams back down in golden ribbons. He nods approvingly. "It's working," he murmurs, more to himself than anyone else. You glance at the surface of the brew. Tiny bubbles rise and pop, releasing a yeasty aroma that smells like bread baking in an oven on a cold winter morning. And then it hits you. This isn't magic. Not in the wand-waving, spell-casting sense. But it is alchemy. A quiet, invisible change where grain, water, and time come together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Historians still argue whether medieval brewers understood the role of wild yeast or if they just got lucky with their timing. Some say they captured strains from the air, others believe the right microbes were already living inside their casks, passed down through generations like sacred heirlooms. Either way, they figured out how to make it work, and that's all that really matters. So tonight, as you sit among them, watching the fire flicker and listening to the soft hum of the brewery, you realize something strange and beautiful. Science might not have had a name yet, but it was already at work. The brewery hums with quiet purpose, but not all brewing was done behind monastery walls. Out in the wider world, beyond cloisters and candlelit halls, beer flowed just as freely, though rarely with the same blessing. You step outside for a moment, letting the cool night air brush against your skin. The abbey is silent now, its prayers long finished, its corridors dimly lit by oil lamps that flicker like tired stars. But beyond these stone walls, the world stirs. In villages, in market towns, in the shadowed corners of bustling cities, beer flows from wooden taps and iron mugs, and not always under divine supervision. Because while monks brewed with prayer and precision, secular brewers worked with profit and practicality. Their hands were stained with hops and sweat, their minds fixed on coin rather than confession. They weren't bound by monastic rules or daily rations. They brewed to sell, to feed tavern crowds, to keep laborers steady through long days of backbreaking work. And yet, despite their different motivations, both kinds of brewers shared one thing: they knew how to make beer. It just depended who you asked whether theirs was a holy craft or a worldly trade. Inside the monastery, Brewing was sacred. Beer was sustenance, medicine, even ritual. A monk who spilled his portion might see it as a lesson in humility, or a minor sin in need of penance. But out here, among the common folk, beer was currency. A way to barter, to celebrate, to forget the weight of another hard day's labor. You imagine a bustling town square at midday, where wooden stalls line the streets and the scent of roasted meat and fresh bread fills the air. At the center of it all, a brewer leans over a barrel, tapping a mug beneath the spigot with practiced ease. His customers, a mix of merchants, craftsmen, and the occasional nobleman looking for a drink without the monastery's judgmental glances, wait eagerly for their turn. He doesn't offer blessings before serving. He doesn't mutter Latin prayers over the mash. But he does know his craft. He knows which grains ferment faster, which herbs preserve longer, which barrels hold flavor best. And if he's clever enough, he keeps his recipes secret, just like the monks did, only for very different reasons. Historians still argue whether medieval beer was truly safer than water, or if the real difference was simply that everyone drank it anyway. Either way, both monks and laymen agreed on one thing: beer was life. So you return to the warmth of the monastery, stepping back inside where the firelight dances across stone floors and the scent of warm wort wraps around you like an old blanket. Here, the beer carries more than flavor. It carries faith, tradition, and centuries of quiet devotion. Out there, it carries something else entirely. But tonight, you're right where you belong. The brewery is quiet now, most of the monks having retired to their cells for the night. But you're still here, sitting near the hearth with a warm mug in your hands, watching the fire flicker against the stone walls. The beer you're drinking, thick, slightly sweet, and laced with coriander and yarrow, settles into your stomach like a comforting blanket. And as you sip, you realize something strange. This isn't just food. It's medicine. Because back in medieval times, beer wasn't just for breakfast or bedtime rituals. It was also prescribed by monks who doubled as apothecaries. In a world without modern medicine, where fevers could kill and childbirth was a gamble at best, beer was more than a drink. It was treatment, a remedy, a balm for the body and soul. You imagine a sick monk lying on a straw mattress, shivering beneath a woolen blanket, his breath shallow. A fellow brother kneels beside him, lifting a wooden cup to his lips. "Drink," he murmurs. "It will help." And maybe it did. Maybe the warmth soothed aching muscles. Maybe the calories gave strength where bread alone couldn't. Maybe the herbs really did have healing properties, or at least made the sufferer feel good enough to pretend they did. Historians still argue whether monastic brewers knew exactly what they were doing when they dosed their beer with St. John's wort and wormwood. Some say they were early chemists, blending medicinal knowledge with brewing tradition. Others believe it was mostly superstition and trial and error, with a few lucky hits along the way. Either way, one thing's certain: beer was used to treat everything from headaches to heartbreak. Pregnant women drank special brews meant to ease labor pains. Soldiers carried flasks of strong beer onto battlefields, hoping it would fortify them before charging headfirst into death. Even plague doctors recommended it during outbreaks, not because it cured disease, but because it kept people fed when fresh food was scarce. You take another slow sip, letting the warmth spread through your chest. Somewhere nearby, a younger monk stirs a pot over the fire, muttering about the right balance of herbs for treating fever. Another checks a patient's pulse, nodding solemnly before reaching for a jug of small beer. This wasn't just brewing. It was healing. Slow, steady, and wrapped in faith. And tonight, as you sit among them, sipping slowly and feeling the weight of history settle around you like a heavy cloak, you understand why beer became more than a drink. It was survival. The fire crackles softly, casting long shadows across the stone walls of the brewery. Outside, the world sleeps beneath a sky heavy with stars, but here, where history stirs like yeast in warm wort, the past feels alive. You lean back against a wooden barrel, mug in hand, and let your thoughts drift to something you hadn't considered before. Beer didn't just fill bellies in medieval Europe. It built empires. You picture it now, not just monks stirring vats in candlelit halls, but entire towns rising around their work. Bridges paved with coins earned from selling surplus brews. Roads repaired with funds collected from beer taxes. Churches funded by barrels of liquid gold, poured into coffers like offerings at an altar. Because yes, monastic breweries weren't just about survival. They were about influence. Some abbeys became so skilled at brewing that they started exporting their beer far beyond the monastery walls. Travelers carried word of its quality to distant lands. Nobles requested special batches for feasts. Even kings sent envoys to sample what had once been meant only for prayer and penance. And with that demand came wealth. Not the kind hoarded in vaults or spent on luxury, but the kind that built hospitals, fed the poor, and kept entire communities thriving under the protection of the cloister. You glance around the room as a monk lifts a freshly sealed cask, grunting slightly under its weight. "This one's for the town," he says, nodding toward the outer gates. The harvest workers need something strong enough to keep them going through the fields. You can almost see it. Farmers bent over wheat rows at dawn, mugs of beer tucked beside their bread loaves, helping them endure another day of back-breaking labor. Because in a world without modern nutrition science, beer wasn't just refreshment. It was sustenance. A thick, filling drink packed with calories, protein, and just enough alcohol to keep the waterborne diseases at bay. Historians still argue whether monasteries brewed beer because of its economic power, or if the money was just a happy accident. Either way, the result was the same. Beer became one of the most valuable commodities in medieval Europe. You take another slow sip, feeling the warmth settle deep in your chest. Around you, the rhythm of brewing continues. Ladles dipping, fires crackling, voices murmuring quiet prayers over fermentation. This isn't just history. It's legacy. And tonight, you're not just drinking beer. You're tasting the foundation of a continent. The fire has burned low now, its embers glowing like sleepy stars beneath the iron kettle. The brewery still hums with quiet life, wooden casks settling into their places along the walls, the occasional hiss of steam escaping from a half-covered vat, but something is shifting. Outside these stone holes, the world is changing. You can feel it in the air, in the way the monks speak in hushed tones over their work. Power is moving, away from monasteries and into the hands of merchants, guilds, and city rulers who no longer need the church to tell them how to brew, or when to drink, or who gets to profit from fermentation. Beer is no longer just a sacred offering. It's a business. And once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. You imagine the towns beyond the monastery gates, where secular brewers have taken over the craft. Wooden signs hang above tavern doors, promising fresh mugs of ale brewed not by monks, but by ordinary men who measure success in coin rather than confession. Some of them learned from the very abbeys that once held all the secrets, picking up techniques during apprenticeships or secret trades of recipe scrolls. Others figured it out on their own, trial and error guiding them where tradition once did. Monastic brewing didn't vanish overnight. It couldn't. Too many people depended on it, from pilgrims seeking shelter to villagers relying on beer for sustenance. But slowly, steadily, the balance shifted. Monks remained skilled brewers, yes, but they were no longer the only ones calling the shots. Historians still argue whether this shift was inevitable or if it came at a cost. Did monasteries lose influence? Or did they simply adapt, finding new ways to serve their communities without holding the monopoly on liquid bread? Either way, one thing is clear: beer had escaped the cloister, and the world would never be the same. The fire is nearly gone now, just a few embers glowing beneath the iron kettle. The brewery feels different, quieter, like it's holding its breath. You lean back against a wooden barrel, your mug warm in your hands, and listen to the soft creak of beams settling into place. This was where it all began. In these halls, among stone walls that have absorbed centuries of whispered prayers and clinking ladles, beer found its purpose, not just as drink, but as nourishment, medicine, even faith. And though the world has moved on, though brewing has long since left the cloister for city streets and modern breweries, something of this place remains. You can feel it in every sip. Because tonight, you didn't just learn how monks brewed beer before alarm clocks or refrigeration. You became part of the rhythm, the slow, steady pulse of tradition passed down through generations. You stirred vats of thick, yeasty wort. You crushed herbs between your fingers. You drank alongside men who saw their work not just as craft, but as devotion. And somewhere along the way, history stopped feeling like something distant. It became real. Something you could smell, taste, feel warming your chest on a cold monastery night. Outside, dawn is still hours away. But inside, the past lingers like the scent of malted barley in the air. The monks have gone to rest, leaving behind the quiet hum of the brewery, the gentle hush of sleeping casks, the soft drip of condensation from the rafters, the faint echo of footsteps long faded into stone. It's peaceful here. Timeless. You take one last sip of beer, letting it settle slowly over your tongue. Thick, slightly sweet, carrying with it the weight of centuries. Historians still argue whether monastic brewers knew exactly what they were doing, or if they simply stumbled upon greatness through patience, prayer, and trial by error. But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the real story isn't about science or economics or even hops. Maybe it's about people. About those who labored in candlelit halls, stirring brews that would feed pilgrims, heal the sick, and keep entire communities alive. About those who saw meaning in every task, no matter how simple. About those who believed that even the smallest acts, like stirring a vat of beer, could carry divine purpose. You set your mug down gently, fingers brushing the worn wood beside you. The warmth hasn't left you. Not yet. Maybe it never will. Because some stories don't end when the final words are spoken. They settle into your bones, curl around your thoughts like mist over a morning field. They stay with you, not as lessons but as whispers. And so, as you rise slowly, stretching your tired limbs, you leave the brewery behind. But the brewery doesn't leave you. The monastery fades behind you now, its stone walls dissolving into the hush of sleep. The firelight dims, the scent of warm wort softens, and the rhythmic clink of ladles against kettles grows quieter, more distant, like echoes carried on a fading breeze. You walk barefoot once more across cool stone floors, but the chill no longer bites at your skin. Instead, the night wraps around you like a familiar blanket, warm and heavy with memory. Somewhere above, stars blink slowly through drifting clouds, watching over the quiet halls where history once stirred in bubbling vats and whispered prayers. The world outside is still. No bells ring. No voices call. Just the soft hush of wind slipping through open windows, carrying with it the lingering scent of malt and herb, of bread and time, of something ancient that still lingers in the spaces between breaths. Tonight, you didn't just hear a story. You lived it, walked it, stirred it into being with your own hands. And now, as sleep begins to pull you downward like the slow settling of foam atop fresh brewed wort, you carry it with you. A quiet toast to monks who brewed in silence, to traditions that endured, to beer that once fed empires and warmed weary souls beneath candlelit ceilings. So close your eyes. Let the past drift softly into dreams. And remember, some stories don't end. They simply pause, waiting for you to listen again. If you enjoyed this quiet corner of history, don't forget to like, share, and hit that bell so you never miss another bedtime tale from the past. And remember, just because the stars above have seen everything, doesn't mean they won't listen to your dreams too. A final, warm whisper. Sweet dreams, traveler. Until next time.